I'm Sarah, and this is what I read in March. The first thing I read was Far from the Light of Heaven by Tade Thompson. This is a sci-fi book. It's about this mission where there's a spaceship and it's piloted mainly by this like really sophisticated artificial intelligence pilot system. It's going from one planet, Earth, to another colony type planet. And it's supposed to take 10 years and everybody's going to be asleep and the pilot pilots the ship and everything goes great. The secondary pilot, Michelle, or I think she goes by Shell, if I remember correctly, is there in case of emergency. And at some point the AI wakes her up and is like, hey, there's a problem. There's some dead people. I don't really know what happened. You get to figure it out. And she gets help from like this various other sources, so they kind of like come together and make this team, and they're on this ship and they're trying to figure out why these passengers have died. And like it's okay. I was liking it mostly. It's a little more sci-fi-ish than I generally go for, and it kept like talking about things and just not really explaining them, and you just kind of had to like, I don't know, like fill in the gaps on your own, which is fine for a book like that. I did have a lot of questions. Like one of the things that kept bothering me and still bothers me when looking back on this book is all the people that were going to be asleep for 10 years while they were on this spaceship ride. It's never explained if they're going to be like actively aging during that time. And I feel like it would almost be kind of implied or assumed, except the main character at some point, she's like, oh, I'm going to be 42 when I wake up, or 40, I don't remember. She's talking about how she's going to be 10 years older. And I'm like, are you? That just doesn't make any sense to me, because why would you want to be asleep for 10 years of your life and then just wake up and you're 10 years older and you were asleep the whole time of like your prime? But like it's never specifically said that they're in like this suspended animation stage, or maybe I missed it. Maybe I wasn't like grasping it fully, but that was bothering me for the entire book. And then the other thing that bothered me was the pacing. We jumped around a lot. There's a lot of characters. We're getting a lot of kind of backstories, some better explained than others. That's all fine, but they're just kind of like all wandering around this ship trying to solve this mystery of what happened to these people that died when everyone was supposed to be asleep. The whole mystery is revealed in this huge info dump. And like, don't get me wrong, I love a good villain monologue where all of a sudden everything's explained, everything makes sense. But there were not enough like little clues throughout the book previously. It just all comes out of nowhere, and it's a lot. It's like, oh, by the way, this all happened because of this planet we haven't even told you about, and this whole like crisis and issue we have never mentioned before. And it's all this backstory is just coming into this huge info dump, and you're literally referencing like planets and groups and just all like that have not shown up at all before. So like, while I think the ultimate like resolution was like a decent enough story, it just needed to be revealed. Like there had to be like little hints and reveals prior to this enormous info dump. And when I say enormous, all the previous chapters in this book are like sometimes 3 pages, 5, maybe like 8, 9, 10. This info dump all happens in one 30-page chapter. And I know, because I counted, because I was like, Jesus, what is going on here? And it's such a weird change of pace from the rest of the book with these like short chapters, switching perspectives, all this to all this info you've never heard before in one huge 30-page chapter. And it's only like a 300-something page book. So 10% of the story is just this big reveal. Yeah. That was my main problem with it. If it had been paced out a little better and the mystery solving team been finding like bits of this mystery as they were going through the ship, like that would have made a lot more sense to me. Here's Callie. She's allowed to come in when I'm filming because she's pretty quiet, but the dogs, if it's not their little nails on the hard floors, then it's the like heavy breathing as they wrestle with each other. I hope you can't hear Callie purring, but I think she wants to hang out here for a little bit. Then next I read Razor Blade Tears, and this one, I unexpectedly liked this. When I read the description of this, I was like, this just seems like a very manly book written by a very manly man. And like, I don't think it would be for me. But then I caught like a good deal on the Kindle version for like $1.99 or something. So I picked it up, and unexpectedly delightful. Now I will say my original assumption that this was going to be like a very manly, violence heavy book was very right. There is a lot of violence that's really kind of gratuitous, and like you don't need all of the violence, but it's fine. It works for this story. It kind of makes up for the violence by like how surprisingly wholesome at the heart the story is. This is about two men. They know each other because their sons were married, and both of them, they had big problems with their sons while their sons were alive because their sons were gay. And now their sons have been brutally murdered, and these two guys are coming together to try and solve the crime. There's a lot of them really coming to terms with how badly they messed up while their sons were alive. And their sons were these good people and they had these good lives, and they were just never able to accept them and how much they missed out on, and now they're gone. So a lot of that's very sad, but it's very good. But again, this is like a very like manly type book. Like both of these men, Buddy Lee in particular, are pretty much indestructible. They're like men in their 50s, I think, and they're like beating the shit out of people. And I'm like, you know, Buddy Lee is often described as being like very frail, and yet he's just regularly getting like fucking. Buddy Lee had 9 lives. So there's a lot of like, oh, we're men, we're gonna avenge our sons, and we're such badasses, we're gonna be such bad avengers and like all that, whatever. I told my husband I think he would have really liked this book. He would have really liked the whole vengeance-y aspect of it. You know, a lot of books might go through this and be like, the end, the message is vengeance is not the answer. This is not that book. This book fully believes vengeance is the answer. It's an enjoyable read. I enjoyed it. The Book of Cold Cases. This is the only one this month that I actually have like the physical copy with me. This was my book of the month, I believe, for March. Yeah, I think I got this in March and I read it in March, and I'm fucking killing it. This is another classic Simone St. James. So there's a mystery and there's like a ghost or two, and it's like a spooky mystery. I like that genre. I'm like trying out more ghost type books, and I think I'm really not like that type of unsettling, creepy, just uncomfortable to read horror. But however, I'm very much down for a mystery where there is or may not be a ghost. This is very much that. I liked this one better than the previous Simone St. James I had read, which was the Sundown Motel, I think it's called. I like this one better. It's about a woman. She runs a website where she looks at cold cases. She has her own kind of like connection to a criminal case, and she happens to run into like this notorious lady from this crime that took place in her own town, and the woman agrees to do these interviews with her to let her kind of post about it on the website and kind of try and figure out what happened. It's good. I think she handled the kind of like spookiness a little better in this one, because I remember in Sundown Motel it's just like instantly the ghosts are there. Like in the introduction there's just like a ton of ghosts dancing around in plain view. This one, it's a little more subtle, which is kind of my preference, because they're scarier when they're not just like, ta-da, I'm a ghost. They're scarier when it's like, oh crap, is that a ghost? Oh, that's spooky. For me, that's how it works for me. I do think there were some like missed opportunities for like more mystery. Like I actually think the central mystery in the Sundown Motel was maybe like a little more tight and made a little more sense than this one. Ultimately, this was a good read, and I would recommend it if you're in for a spooky mystery. I read Joan is Okay, and this book is a harder one for me to review because there are so many like different topics in this book. The main character she's Chinese American. Her parents were Chinese and they immigrated to America and had her in America, raised her, and now she's an ICU doctor, and she is an ICU doctor when like the COVID pandemic hits, and it's just about her kind of like trying to fit into the world, both with like not feeling connected to China and her parents after her parents go back to China, and then her brother who lives in the US and has just like this different idea of how to be successful and pay off what their family, what their parents sacrifice for them. And she's just kind of a awkward person. Like it never comes out and says anything, but it's definitely implied that she might be autistic or have Asperger's or something along that nature. So there's just a lot of really good stuff in here. But my thought process after reading this book was, and while reading it, was that if you're gonna write a book, you might as well go ahead and say something, you know, because this book just doesn't have like a clear plot line. It's just all these little kind of like vignettes almost about like things that are happening in Joan's life, and they're just not really related, and just Joan's not like super likable, and it's just boring, especially because it's kind of like advertised as, oh, a Chinese American ICU doctor in the COVID pandemic, and like, if that's what you're looking for, this book is not going to give it to you. Like, Joan is all of those things, but it just doesn't, like, it's barely in the book. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, and there's like a pandemic, and now there's, this book is so hard for me to describe because I didn't like it, but I feel like I wish I could have liked it. I wish there was something more to it. I would not recommend it, and I particularly would not recommend it if you're looking for it to say anything at all about like the COVID-19 pandemic, because it does not. Doctors and Friends is a little closer despite not actually being about the COVID-19 pandemic. This is actually a book this woman wrote about a respiratory virus pandemic that she'd actually written most of the book, I believe, before the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's actually about a fictional virus. This book is written by an actual physician or a retired physician. She was an emergency medicine physician. There are some like pandemic scenes in this book where the main character is like a doctor in a hospital, an emergency room, in all of this pandemic chaos. And those scenes are written absolutely fucking amazing. And they're like heartbreaking, and they're just like, they're so stressful to read. All of the emotion that should be there is there, and all of the like technical aspect and just everything. It's such a good written chapter. But I feel like that's not what the author wants to write about. The majority of the book is like actually focused on these doctors and like their friendships and their interpersonal lives, and it's just not as interesting. And looking back, I feel like I can kind of connect that with the other book I read by this author, where she actually writes these like medical scenes really well, and they're really good to read and really interesting, but she just wants to focus more about like, oh, the emotions of being a doctor and how it affects your personal life and your friendships and being a mother. And I get that that's the book she wants to write, and it's fine. It's not bad, but I would have liked this book so much more if she would have focused more on the actual pandemic and just less on this tight-knit group of 7 friends. It was disappointing because, like I said, the one chapter in particular, like, it is just so well done. And if the whole book had been like that, I can't even imagine how good it could have been. I wish it had been more. All right, Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins. I almost did not buy this book. I almost did not read this book because I did not like the other book I read by this author, which was The Wife Upstairs. It didn't do it for me. I like the writing, but like the mystery itself was just, I wonder where the missing wife could be. I wonder where she could be. But anyway, Reckless Girls was the absolute perfect book to take on vacation with me, because this book is about this girl who has a boyfriend, and they've got a boat, and they're sailing to this remote island with these other people, and all this like mysterious stuff starts happening. So there's like a mystery to it, but there's also just a lot of like laying on the beach and drinking and talking about how pretty the island is and how pretty the beach is. And it was a perfect book. I started reading this on the plane to get on a cruise ship.
Hey, I'm on vacation.
And it was easy to read. It was getting me pumped for vacation. I read the rest of it, I think, like sitting next to the pool on the cruise ship. There's not a ton to this book. It ends up being pretty straightforward, pretty predictable. It like hints that there's gonna be a little more to it, but it never really pays off. It's very straightforward, but it was super entertaining, and it was just honestly like a perfect vacation book. And then I did read a second book by Simone St. James this month. This one was my favorite by this author so far. So I liked this one better than the Book of Cold Cases, which I liked better than The Sundown Motel, but I do think I gave them all 4 stars all across. Like, they were all about a 4-star. This is about a woman. She lives in a small town. 20 years ago, her sister was killed as a teenager, and her body was dumped at this like abandoned boarding school for girls. And now it's 20 years later, and someone's trying to remodel and reopen up the school. The woman's really puzzled by it, starts investigating, starts finding out about all these spooky legends and things that have happened. And it was good. This one just really nailed, I think, the balance between the like undercurrent of spookiness and the like day-to-day mystery type stuff. And I thought the 2 stories, the way they kind of like tied together, worked out really well, because there's like kind of a main story of the girl trying to investigate the boarding school, and then you're actually back in the past with like students at the boarding school in the 50s. So it's kind of side by side, and everything just came together really well, and I just really enjoyed this one. And if you're looking for a spooky mystery and you want to do like a Simone St. James, The Broken Girls is the one I would recommend starting with. I also read at least the second half of this one while I was on vacation, and it was another good vacation book. Like, it didn't have the tropical vibes of Reckless Girls, but you know, mystery thrillers are kind of my like relaxing vacation books. I always look at what other books people are reading on vacation, and you know, you always see the older, like the boomer men are always reading like a biography, usually like World War II or some other type of like war history nonfiction. I saw a girl about my age reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I had questions for her. I did. I can't imagine that being your vacation read. I'm still thinking about it. I saw a lot of people reading Colleen Hoover. That made sense to me. That makes sense to me as a vacation book. And I saw a lot of people, you know, reading mystery thrillers. So leave me a comment down below and tell me, like, what books do you bring on vacation? Like, what is it that you like to read when you're just relaxing and you just want to sit and enjoy yourself? And yeah, that's everything I read in March, and I'll see you guys next time.